Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Reinsurance podcast. I'm your co-host, Jerad Lee.
And I'm Ben Rose.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much. And today we're here to talk about what my wife recently called decomposing apple strudel.
Partnerships.
Yeah, so let me just link this up for you because you're probably confused, and rightly so. But it's actually because my wife is French, and the le verb décomposer, which I've just horribly butchered, is kind of our word deconstructed as well. And we went to a restaurant recently, and she said, "Look at this decomposing apple strudel." And I was like, "Deconstructed apple strudel?" And we eventually worked out what we were talking about. And the reason I bring this up is because underwriting, broking, etc., all these different activities in the risk industry, you can't do all of them.
No.
And often you can partner to be able to do different pieces. You know, some people are really good at distribution. Others are fantastic at claims. Others really know how to price a good risk. And that's what I hope sets you up neatly for a discussion about partnerships.
You can tell the maturation process of us as podcasters, because before we would have spent 45 minutes on apple strudel, but no longer. We are going straight into reinsurance discussion, despite how deeply curious I am about this deconstructed apple strudel that you'd had at your...
Well, I mean, at first when you said how much we'd come along as podcasts, I thought you meant in terms of clearly we've gone to finer dining.
Yeah, exactly.
It must be a successful podcast if you can afford deconstructed apple strudel.
Exactly.
But no, it's just the sad times of thinking, even whilst having fine dining experiences, about, this could be a reinsurance analogy.
Yeah, no, I think it does work. We're going to go with it either way. No, but we've talked a lot in earlier episodes about sort of you have oftentimes these three parties in a reinsurance transaction, right? You have your cedent, you have your broker, and you have your reinsurance underwriters. But that's like level one of partnerships in our industry. You have everything from MGAs and MGUs to helping find and source risk. You have third-party claims providers and support that sort of come in and go, you just want to provide capital, but we'll build the whole infrastructure to take care of all of your claims, and these sorts of players. And so the industry is actually at its core super entrepreneurial, which we've always talked about. And it has all these opportunities for a party who wants to be excellent in one area or focus in one area, but lean on the expertise or reach or market knowledge of other parties. I think one of the more interesting ones to me is how you leverage partnerships to access new risk, right? And you see this a ton, both on the broking side and on the underwriting side. But you have it where you're a UK business and you want to, begin to do some bit more business in the US or in Asia or Latin America or wherever. And it's a lot of work and it's super, super expensive to just go set up shop there. So the best way to always do it is to find some local partners to share your expertise, to help find a business model that makes sense for both of you, and use that as a starting point. Those oftentimes end in M&A, which again, why we have so much of that in our space, or them sort of going out and deciding, yep, there's enough here for us to be of interest, and then they put their own sort of boots on the ground there. So it's a really, really compelling way to access risk for our space.
And I think what's really exciting, so going back to the strudel, which I will continue to do, no matter how much you try to stop me, is the deconstructing of these various value propositions into their component parts. Any one of them could be the angle that gets you that access. So it might be that it's a regional thing, for example, in which case distribution might be the key thing that gives you access. Or it might be that it's a market that, they'll give you a great example from the Lloyd's Lab recently. We just didn't know how to price something before. And that's why we couldn't access the buyers in that market, in which case, for example, Gaia, the startup that's found a way to price against the risk of failed fertility treatments for IVF, etc. That kind of market before was inaccessible to insurers that were basically capital providers and reinsurers who wanted access to new risks. They might have been able to do a big marketing campaign, but they needed some way of pricing it. And then they found a startup to be able to do it. At the other end of the spectrum, you get markets like out in the US, for example, one of my favorite unbundled situations was with a company called WeGoLook, who are actually loss adjusters. And they've managed to find a way of providing a loss adjusting service by leveraging people who owned trucks in the middle of nowhere in very sparsely populated large US states, where previously they would have had to charge quite a lot to be able to service those states, because they knew anytime somebody broke down or had a claim or needed to investigate something, they would have had to maintain a local operation of some kind that could, within a reasonable time frame, get to someone's house in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And the next house along was another 40 miles away, and so on. So to support that, they've got this incredible provider that said, don't worry, you can now access this customer group because we'll do all the loss adjusting for you through this clever invention of signing up random people who own trucks and letting them know when somebody needs you to look at their loss.
Yeah, the sort of Uberisation of these kinds of things, I think, is really valuable. And there was another company that did it with like roadside repair, where something similar, where they're going, well, you have like AAA or AA here in the UK that has this fleet of vehicles that can go out and pick up and help cars who are stranded. And in major motorways, that's fine, right? As you said, it's sufficiently connected. There's enough capacity of drivers that it makes sense to have that. But when you go further afield, it doesn't make sense for those organizations to have these fleets of cars in rural areas. And it's super hard to know where to deploy them or similar. But you've built up this way to democratize access to support cars. Like, oh, my uncle knows how to fix cars and he lives up to the road. And just like that, someone who's broken down is able to get the service and support that they need, and the whole system works more effectively. So I think you're right. There's partnerships even in that case. The one that you touched on to start, though, I think is super, super interesting, and it's the ability to price or understand a risk in a way that you never could before, right? Early, that was sort of cyber companies beginning to identify, like, well, here's how you can protect yourself against hackers and build protective moats against, firewalls and all these types of things that were involved there. But I think that's the real interest when you think about what drove the first wave of insurtech, maybe 10 years ago, was a real idea that there's a huge pool of risk that is in this uninsurable category that we can begin to chip away at and go, well, there's actually no reason we can't do it. We just have never understood it enough.
Yeah.
But now we do. Now we have this tech that can look at those things, so they can take fertility tests, so they can evaluate and assess the likelihood of a loss here. We can now price it because we understand it better and sell a product to people who want to protect themselves against the likelihood that this thing happens.
And a partner might be somebody who, helps you by just being somebody who knows your potential customer better.
Yep.
You think of affiliate kind of schemes where, I don't know, you're booking a flight or something, and it's very difficult to sell somebody a flight insurance policy outside of a time when they're about to buy a plane ticket, right? You're like, do you want flight insurance for the next year? And they're like, well, we haven't worked out where we're going on holiday yet.
Yeah.
Or it's like, do you want flight insurance for last year? We've already been and nothing happened. So,
Yeah.
all right, thank you. It's much easier if you've got a partner that, is already selling the flight tickets and at point of sale can say, do you also want insurance? And I think other partners go that step further, as you were saying, and you couldn't underwrite them because their risk was too great, and the partner's actually the one that helps reduce their risk. To your cyber example, there was a great company called Zagure that I think got acquired by HSB a few years ago, that was acting as like a CISO, like a Chief Information Security Officer, as a service for supplier type organizations, and then very smartly selling through the distribution of a major brand, like a department store, let's say, and saying all of your stores, basically all of your suppliers should have this CISO as a service technology, and if they install that, we've got an insurance partner that will insure them as long as they meet all of the requirements of our cyber checks. And it was like a way of presenting a customer with, before your supply chain was basically underinsured, if insured at all. But with this product, not only are we going to make sure that everybody's got basic cyber protection in place, improve their risk, but on top of that, we're going to make sure that everybody has insurance as well, so that your supply chain is now much more robust. And on top of that, the insurer, who before was like not touching those, random suppliers that we've got no data on and we don't know how they're doing with their cyber protection, suddenly that's a new market for them to safely tap into as well. I hate to always land on this, but better data are key to partnerships. But,
yeah. I think, though, there was a bit of a shift of a number of years ago where the insurers really recognized that people don't want to buy insurance, and that's okay. Like, they want insurance oftentimes, but like it's rare that after I've done a thing, like if we even move away from travel insurance or similar, but like if I buy a new TV, it's rare that like 3 weeks later I go, I should increase my renter's insurance, or I should go and buy a separate policy for that doesn't come into mind. But if you're presenting someone at point of sale with for an additional like $25, 20 pounds, whatever it might be, do you want to protect this item? Again, the take-up rate is like nominal right now, but you're introducing it where I don't need to go to a specific insurance carrier and buy these additional things and make it my insurance life complex. But I do kind of want the thing in case what I'm buying breaks or is lost or similar. So if the insurers can get out of the way and you leverage partnerships and other channels as a way to sort of provide service without inconveniencing the customer, then you're going to really see both an improvement in the insurance coverage that societies and economies have, but also the value that they're able to deliver to clients, and then build a pool of resource that they can use to protect other consumers.
So we've presented, I guess, here a smorgasbord of interesting partnership case studies, but how do we know when to partner and when to do it yourself? Like, what are the things to think about?
Yeah, I think there's always a cost assessment up front, right? Whether this is a technology solution you're looking to build in-house, in which case that assessment looks like the cost of building plus the cost of ongoing maintenance forever. You have the cost, the return on that. Oftentimes, if it's something else, if it's access to new risk, it's going, or we could invest a huge amount and go into new geography, a new line of business, but how long until we begin to make that money back, and what is so you're doing so that sort of costing assessment. But I think as well, you're establishing what you're looking to achieve up front, going, okay, if this is successful, what does that look like in 4 or 5 years? And then what does that look like from there?
It's super interesting, isn't it? I was just thinking about it as you were describing the cost assessment. It reminds me of our corporate strategy episode with Harold all that time ago. But you're almost having to choose, what is your value proposition? What are your strengths? What are the things you can differentiate in and be really good at as, the party in this chain? And then how do you form effective partnerships to provide a collective value proposition that's going to appeal to a customer? And I think some party in this mix has responsibility for joining them all up so that the customer experiences a seamless service. So I'll give you an example. I think I get my car insurance through Admiral in the UK, but they don't do their own breakdown service. Why would every insurance company have their own breakdown service when we've got two or more very strong national providers that all the insurers use? So they've decided what we're good at is the insurance part, but not breakdown. Breakdown as a claims service is something we'll use a partner for. And I suspect that they and many other players actually also outsource their claims and probably share claims and TPA type administration groups and call centers and all sorts of things, rather than having just their own. Unless you've decided that your strength is actually, I don't know, we're direct line, let's say, and the way that we're going to be different is we're going to have our own call centers that we think will give a much better level of customer service than everybody else's will. There might be other insurers are like, actually what we compete on is price, or it might be underwriting things that other people won't underwrite, but they all share the same call center as a bunch of other insurers. Yeah. So you really got to pick and choose, I suppose, which bit you think you can actually add value in.
Yep.
But very rarely, I think, does anybody decide that they're going to go fully full stack.
Yeah.
Right.
There's almost no such thing as fully full stack.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you deconstruct it far enough, you're always going to, like, in the same way, like, no one knows how to build an iPhone.
Yeah.
Right. Because there's no one who knows how to like mine the ore. And then also like there's so many things
Yeah.
that happen along the way. I think it's similar here where at some point you're offloading parts of what you do already. It's just a very focused effort as to which part specifically. And I think you put it really nicely in that like, what is it you're good at? And be very, very clear around the thing that you want to differentiate with, the value you want to provide, and then be willing to look around your organization and go, who does these other things better than we could do in-house? The other thing that made me that I thought of while you were talking was even finding partnerships in competitors.
Yeah.
Right. There's an association, I've totally forgotten the name now. You might know it, but in the U.S. that does auto claims data.
Yeah.
And
we've got the motor insurance database in the UK, which is
and at the time, State Farm is the largest U.S. Auto carrier, and all these carriers are trying to bundle their claims data together so they could have a better lens as to the claims landscape, et cetera. And they couldn't get State Farm to join it until they identified that actually it's super helpful in identifying fraud. You know, this one person had a Progressive policy, claimed, then quit, and they joined Farmers. They got claimed, they quit, and they did this over and over. That actually, if everyone pools all their claims data together, everyone can draw on that when they're writing policies and understand who's a fraud risk. Then actually, it's one of those things going, I don't really care if my fraud risk goes down. I don't really care if my competitor's fraud risk also goes down, because fraud hurts everybody, right? But it's this identification that there are opportunities then from all the parties to sort of pool data together, which may have historically been siloed in a way that's like, well, this is my proprietary view or information that I have. But taking a step back and going, actually, would I benefit even further if I saw everything else too? And that was aggregated in such a way that we all agreed it was valuable. So I think there's even ways for them to find potentially competing parties and make them partners in this type of stuff.
Totally. And I think actually that was a really nice way of expressing reinsurance as a partnership in itself, right? And even MGA and insurer capital relationships, you often see, you know, a brand name that you're buying insurance from, and it says, you know, ABC Insurance is a trading name of XYZ Capital, who in turn is reinsured by certain underwriters at Lloyd's of London, you know, who in turn are, they're all picking their area, right? It might be that actually the first party is really good at providing a great customer service, and that's why they're at the beginning, but capital management, you know, is not their strong point, or building a float and investing that float is not their strong point. So actually they stay off risk and they get a fee or commission in exchange for administrating the business and bringing it in the door. And then the insurance company carefully manages the amount of risk that it wants to retain, and it recognizes that actually volatility is not their strong point. And so they pass that to a reinsurer, who in turn says, you know what, actually Florida exposures are not our strong point, or flood isn't our strong point, so we're going to pass that on to a partner who in turn will look after that peak volatility, and so on. And that gets super interesting from a partnerships perspective, because very often the players that you use as partners are with a different hat on your competitors.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's always, when you go back to the start with this lens as to, you know, costing it and then knowing what value you want to deliver to your end consumer, there's also the point when you evaluate and assess whether or not it's time to move on or end a partnership or absorb a partnership or similar, right? And I think when you look at something as sort of simple as like a customer experience, early on, you might be more than happy to have someone manage the onboarding or the website sign-up flow or something similar. But at a certain point, the business might be growing sufficiently large that you go, actually, that part is really, really key, because whatever an analytics you've run, that you want to own that and do more there and really lean in and invest heavily there. You might choose to then bring more of that in-house, buy that agency, or set up a local subsidiary. You might look at, in a certain region, it's a bunch of high net worth drivers. So we actually have our own special fleet of support vehicles that we put out there. Because despite, you know, the national providers being around, the value add that you want to deliver now exceeds what so you begin to do something more there. But there's this real clear lens as to where you want to anchor your value proposition and investing in the things that are going to make the most difference to your clients.
And I think part of that comes down to, as you said, can we differentiate in that, but also can we do it cheaper ourselves?
Yeah.
I think what's one of the most interesting books I've read recently actually is a book called Rockonomics, which talks about what happens when, taking the case study of the music industry, you're able to replicate an existing good at zero additional cost.
Mm-hmm.
So the cost of reproduction of a thing you want to sell is tending towards zero.
Mm-hmm.
It completely changes the dynamics of an industry and the way things fit together. Very interesting book if you're interested in that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But my takeaway from that is in the insurance space is if you're talking about a fleet of repair vehicles, the example you gave, the cost of adding new vehicles is quite expensive. And so in those cases, if a third party wants to support all of your claims as well, actually they might not be that much cheaper with the increased number of policyholders that you bring than you having your own fleet of recovery vehicles, depending on the geography you're dealing with, etc., and the footprint that you have. However, what's super interesting is then when some of these solutions can be provided through digital technology, SaaS in particular, the software as a service models, where if everybody produces their own version of software, each of them has the cost of building and maintaining and developing that software. But typically, if it's a sufficiently standard product, an individual third party could produce it for a much lower cost and sell it to many parties. With no reproduction costs. It's like, oh, you want this MP3 too?
Yeah.
I don't know if MP3s even exist anymore. But you can burn a copy of that software almost onto your site, and why then couldn't AXA, Allianz, Admiral, all the other accelerant, I don't know, A insurers, all be using the same software and then effectively paying the cost of that software together, which I think we're seeing happen increasingly more and more, because there is no scenario where the sum cost of all of them producing that same software themselves would be cheaper than getting one individual party to do it on behalf of all of them.
Well, and I think when you look as well at, because I was also thinking about the exact same line of reasoning. That's spot on for why you're seeing technology impact our industry in the way that it is. But it's also important to also look at the fact that everything is collaborated and shared between these parties. So it'd almost be equivalent to, in the late 80s, every single Fortune 500 deciding they're going to write their own software to create text documents. And now no one can actually open it because that no one has built the same thing, and they have to spend ages trying to figure out how to. But if they all just used the Microsoft's documents, you sent me that, I can open it and read it, and I can send you something back, and there's this shareability that happens there.
I mean, there's
that framework works right now, right? But it's still only in a spreadsheet, but if we're moving towards everyone's using similar tools to do heavy lifting, not only is it reducing the cost significantly for anyone to have that ability, but it makes it easier for them to work with their partners who can also just log into it and update stuff. And
totally. And I think this, to risk using an analogy on the podcast, and apologies for any mythological inaccuracies as I attempt to do so, when many parties each create their own version of a solution, you end up with a Tower of Babylon kind of effect where everybody then is talking a different language, right? They've all found their own way to present the same set of ideas and concepts, or they've created their own paradigms to express their reality in a way that doesn't easily share or translate or convert or reconcile with anybody else's idea of that same reality. I mean, all these insurers, brokers, reinsurers, etc., they're all talking about the same kind of policies and deals at the end of the day, because the market asks them to provide a certain standard of deal. But if they all go off and create their own software for handling it, that's when the issues, I think, come.
Well, and at the end of the day, the market's still analyzing, assessing, understanding, and pricing those various risks. It's just very difficult to do so when you spend so much time understanding what they've actually said.
Yeah.
Right? When you look at the efficiencies of the banking industry, because they sort of work off relatively uniformed like version of metrics and things that show me how successful is this company being, what's their forecast, how are they performing. I can look at most companies that are publicly traded and kind of very quickly evaluate who's doing well, who's not doing well. And you can do the same thing within reinsurance and evaluating a portfolio or a large facultative program. But the work it takes to get to that assessment is profound.
Flashbacks of global market sizes in our consulting days.
Yeah, exactly.
Why have they only published gross net?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So you're trying to get to essentially the position where all I care about is I can evaluate this risk versus some others, see some trends. But the Tower of Babylon model has made it where I can do it, I just don't speak that language, and neither do you. But we have a friend who does, so he'll translate it to you, and you'll translate it to me, and then I'll understand it. Yeah. We've just added that same sort of replication and efficiency that's involved. And the better we're able to kind of go, we just can turn things on or off, and then get that view, great. You wanted to present it one way, and that's fine, but I need to look at it this way, and I can do that translation very, very quickly. And now we move forward. And like this is where it's super interesting where that it's going, and the sort of rise of SaaS is making that possible, which is interesting.
Yeah, and it's funny, isn't it? Because thanks to the plethora even internally at many insurance companies, especially the way they've grown up through mergers and acquisitions and things, even internally they have hundreds of policy admin systems that don't speak the same language, which is fascinating. And I think with a lot of SaaS, if I look at delegated authority, if I look at reinsurance submissions, if I look at, pretty much anywhere, most of the focus for SaaS over the past decade has been less around how do we do something better, but rather how do we clean up something that's been done inconsistently. Yeah. Right? It's like, how do we understand bordereau that are coming in all different shapes and sizes to us every month that we can't really underwrite properly? How do we understand, reinsurance submission data that comes from 12 different systems isn't really in a good template format at all? We can't consistently aggregate it. And so a lot of technology now is being demanded to clean up things before we can even get to the state of saying, how about you do it right first time? Yeah. But all the same, I think that's what's needed. And to continue the British Museum of Analogies, SaaS can be a kind of Rosetta Stone to combat the Babylon Tower. Yeah. That's a nice, less than 10 words phrase, isn't it? Yeah. SaaS, can put that on my gravestone. SaaS can be the Rosetta Stone to combat the Babylon Tower. Yeah. Don't put that on my gravestone.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll have something better by the time in the next 70 years. We'll have a better gravestone quote for you than that.
No, indeed. But in terms of partnerships and things, I think we're just at the beginning, right? Like in terms of people realizing what they can do, we're seeing, not just positive outreach, positive being the wrong word, proactive outreach from insurers to potential parties. We're often seeing it the other way around as well, right? We saw a few years ago Maersk saying we need to sort out shipping and the way we insure that. We're seeing Tesla say Tesla insurance is going to be a thing now. We're seeing Airbnb think if people are going to trust putting their homes on our site, they probably need some kind of insurance. There's a lot of proactive engagement on both sides now, where it's not just capital looking for a home to find. There's a lot of risks out there. It's a risky world.
It is a risky world.
Got to find a partner to stay safe.
Yeah. Oh, we should end on that.
Yeah, it sounded a bit like an advert for some kind of protection product, didn't it? Anyway.
That's why it was so powerful.
Yeah.
Fade to black. Perfect. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. See you next time.